Kathryn Adams ran like a hunted animal through the barren Wyoming landscape of 1876, her tattered dress catching on sagebrush as twilight descended across the endless prairie. Blood from her split lip mingled with dust and tears on her face, but she dared not slow down. Behind her lay the ranch house where she'd endured 2 years of servitude under the cruel hand of her uncle. Ahead lay uncertain freedom, if she could only keep moving through the night. The horizon blurred as Kathryn staggered forward. 3 days with barely any water or food had taken their toll. Her escape had been hastily planned after overhearing her uncle's plan to marry her off to a wealthy widower 3 times her age, a man known for his cruelty toward his first wife. She had slipped away in the pre-dawn darkness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch containing her mother's locket and the few coins she'd managed to save. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt and sway. Each breath burned in her lungs as spots danced before her eyes. The distant silhouette of mountains wavered like a mirage. Kathryn knew she needed to find shelter and water soon, but there was nothing but open country for miles. Her legs finally betrayed her. As the last golden rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Kathryn's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the dusty trail, her body unable to carry her another step. As consciousness slipped away, she thought she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, but perhaps it was just the pounding of her own heart as darkness claimed her. Samuel Reed spotted the crumpled form on the trail ahead just as his horse, Maverick, snorted and slowed his pace. The fading light made it difficult to see clearly, but there was no mistaking the shape of a person lying motionless in the dirt. "Whoa there," he called, pulling the reins gently as he approached. Samuel dismounted with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his 28 years in the saddle. His spurs jingled softly as he knelt beside the figure. It was a young woman, face down in the dirt. Her dress was torn and her dark hair had come loose from what might have once been a neat bun. Carefully, he turned her over, revealing a face smudged with dirt and dried blood. She was breathing, but just barely. "Miss, can you hear me?" Samuel asked, his voice gentle despite its natural depth. When she didn't respond, he checked for serious injuries. Finding none beyond scrapes and bruises, he made a quick decision. Night was falling fast, and his cabin was still a good hour's ride away. Leaving her here wasn't an option. With gentle hands, Samuel lifted the unconscious woman and carried her to Maverick. The horse remained steady as Samuel mounted with his unexpected burden cradled against his chest. He urged Maverick into a careful trot, mindful of his fragile passenger. "Just hold on," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I've got you now." The journey to his cabin took longer than usual as Samuel kept their pace measured to avoid jostling the woman too much. By the time the simple log structure came into view, darkness had fully descended, with only a bright moon illuminating their path. Samuel's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, with a modest corral and barn to one side. He dismounted carefully, still holding the woman, and carried her inside. After placing her on his bed, he quickly returned outside to see to Maverick, before gathering water from the nearby spring. Back inside, Samuel lit the lamp and stoked the embers in the fireplace until a warm glow filled the cabin. He turned his attention to his unexpected guest. In the lamplight, he could see she was young, perhaps 20 or so, with delicate features currently marred by exhaustion, dehydration, and what appeared to be recent violence. Samuel soaked a clean cloth in cool water and gently began washing the dirt and blood from her face. As he worked, he wondered what circumstances had brought this young woman to collapse alone on a rarely traveled trail miles from the nearest town. Whatever her story, it clearly wasn't a happy one. The woman stirred slightly when the cool cloth touched her split lip, a soft moan escaping her. "It's all right," Samuel said softly. "You're safe now." He continued his ministrations, cleaning her face and hands before trying to get some water between her parched lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but she swallowed a little. Taking that as a good sign, Samuel pulled a chair next to the bed and settled in for what would likely be a long night. Kathryn floated in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of gentle hands and a deep, soothing voice, other times lost in fevered dreams where her uncle's angry face loomed over her. When she finally opened her eyes fully, sunlight was streaming through a window she didn't recognize. Panic seized her as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. She was in a simple but clean cabin, lying on a comfortable bed covered with a worn quilt. The smell of coffee and something cooking reached her, along with the sound of movement nearby. Kathryn attempted to sit up, but her body betrayed her with weakness. A small gasp escaped her lips as she fell back against the pillow. "You're awake." The deep voice came from across the room. Kathryn turned her head to see a man approaching with a steaming mug. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of a life outdoors. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and his eyes, a striking blue, regarded her with concern. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely more than a rasp. "My cabin, about 20 miles northeast of Laramie," he answered, setting the mug on a small table beside the bed. "I found you collapsed on the trail 2 days ago." 2 days? Kathryn's eyes widened. The man nodded. "You've been drifting in and out of fever." "I was starting to worry I might need to fetch the doctor from town." He offered her the mug. "Think you can manage some broth? You need to get your strength back." Kathryn hesitated, eyeing both the man and the mug with suspicion. Her experiences had taught her caution around men, especially strangers. As if reading her thoughts, he stepped back. "My name's Samuel Reed. I run cattle on a small spread nearby. I promise I mean you no harm, miss." "Kathryn," she offered after a moment's hesitation. "Kathryn Adams." Samuel nodded. "Well, Miss Adams, you're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel. There's no rush." Kathryn's suspicion warred with her desperate circumstances. She had nowhere to go, no money to speak of, and was clearly in no condition to travel. For now, at least, she would have to trust this stranger. With shaking hands, she accepted the mug and took a small sip. The warm chicken broth was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in days, and she had to resist the urge to gulp it down. "Slowly now," Samuel cautioned. "Your stomach won't be used to much after so long without." Kathryn nodded and continued sipping carefully. As she did, she studied her rescuer more closely. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His clothes were well worn but clean, simple cotton shirt, denim trousers, and boots that had seen many miles. There was nothing threatening in his manner, yet Kathryn remained wary. "Thank you," she said finally, handing back the half-empty mug, "for helping me." Samuel's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Kathryn said quietly. "Not anyone." Something in her tone made Samuel's smile fade. He studied her for a moment, taking in the fading bruise on her cheek and the healing split in her lip. His eyes held a question he didn't voice. "You should rest more," he said instead. "I'll be outside tending to chores if you need anything." After he left, Kathryn sank back against the pillow, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. She needed a plan. Her uncle wouldn't simply let her disappear, not when he'd arranged a marriage that would have benefited him financially. Eventually, he would come looking, and when he did, she needed to be far away. But for now, her body demanded rest. Despite her wariness, Kathryn felt her eyes growing heavy. The clean bed, the warm broth in her stomach, and the absence of immediate danger conspired to pull her back towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was a prayer that she had not escaped one dangerous situation only to fall into another. When Kathryn next woke, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She felt stronger, the desperate edge of her thirst and hunger having been dulled by the broth. Testing her strength, she carefully pushed herself into a sitting position. The cabin was small but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair placed before it. A simple table with 2 chairs stood near a window, and shelves holding various supplies lined another wall. It was a bachelor's home, sparse but functional. The door opened, and Samuel entered carrying an armful of firewood. He stopped short when he saw her sitting up. "You're looking better," he observed, depositing the wood in a box near the fireplace. "I feel better," Kathryn replied, "though still rather weak. That's to be expected." Samuel moved to a pot hanging over the banked coals in the fireplace. "Think you might manage some stew? It's nothing fancy, just venison and whatever vegetables I had on hand." Kathryn's stomach growled audibly at the mention of food, drawing a chuckle from Samuel. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, ladling stew into a bowl. He helped her move to sit at the table, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. The simple act of walking the few steps from bed to table left Kathryn embarrassingly winded. "I'm sorry to be such a burden," she said, once she'd caught her breath. Samuel set the bowl before her. "You're not a burden, Miss Adams, just someone who needed help." They ate in silence for a while, Kathryn forcing herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. Samuel seemed content not to pry, though curiosity was evident in his occasional glances. Finally, Kathryn spoke. "I should explain how I came to be on that trail." Samuel shook his head. "You don't owe me any explanations." "Perhaps not, but I'd like to give one all the same." Kathryn set down her spoon, gathering her courage. "I was running away." Samuel waited, his expression neutral. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I was sent to live with my uncle in Cheyenne. She paused, the words sticking in her throat. "He was not kind. I was treated more as a servant than family. 3 days ago, I overheard him arranging my marriage to a man named Harlan Weber." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Weber, the cattle baron?" Kathryn nodded. "You know of him?" "By reputation only. He owns half the county north of here." Samuel's expression darkened. "And that reputation isn't good." "No, it isn't," Kathryn agreed. "His first wife died under questionable circumstances, and he's 30 years my senior when I refused the match, my uncle." She gestured vaguely to her face where the bruises were still visible. Samuel's hands tightened on his spoon, but his voice remained even. "So you ran?" "That night. I took what little I had and fled. I thought I could make it to Laramie, perhaps find work there. But I miscalculated the distance, and the water in my canteen ran out sooner than expected." Kathryn looked down at her bowl. "If you hadn't found me." "But I did," Samuel said simply. "And you're welcome to stay until you decide what comes next." Kathryn looked up, surprised by the offer. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. Winter's coming on, and I could use the help around here if you're willing." "Can you cook?" "Yes, of course." "Then we have a fair exchange. Room and board for cooking and whatever other chores you feel up to, at least until spring when traveling would be safer." The offer was generous, suspiciously so to Kathryn's wary mind. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "My mother raised me to believe that kindness shouldn't need reasons. But if you want one, let's just say I understand what it's like to need a safe place." He stood, taking their empty bowls. "Think about it. There's no rush to decide." But Kathryn had already made her decision. She had nowhere else to go, no money and no prospects. and despite her caution, she found herself trusting this quiet, straightforward man who asked for nothing in return for his help. "I accept," she said, "and I promise I'll earn my keep." Samuel nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. We'll start tomorrow, once you've had more rest." As the days turned into weeks, Kathryn gradually regained her strength. True to his word, Samuel was a respectful host, sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace while she occupied his bed despite her protests. He was often gone during daylight hours, tending to his small herd of cattle or hunting to supplement their winter stores, but evenings found them sharing meals and conversation by the fire. Kathryn learned that Samuel had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of battle that still haunted him. He'd worked as a ranch hand before saving enough to stake his own modest claim 5 years earlier. He lived simply but contentedly, though she sometimes caught a shadow of loneliness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking for her part. Kathryn found herself settling into the rhythm of life at the cabin. As her strength returned, she took over the cooking and cleaning, and even began venturing outside to feed the chickens and help with other light chores. The fresh air and simple work helped chase away the lingering shadows of her time with her uncle. One crisp October morning, Kathryn was hanging laundry on a line stretched between two pines when she spotted a rider approaching. Fear clutched at her heart had her uncle found her. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and hurried back toward the cabin. Samuel emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, having also spotted the visitor. He positioned himself between Kathryn and the approaching rider. "Get inside," he said quietly. Kathryn hesitated. "Samuel, if it's my uncle, I'll handle it. Go on now." She retreated to the cabin but stayed near the window, watching anxiously as the rider drew closer. Relief flooded through her when she realized it wasn't her uncle or anyone she recognized. The man who dismounted was older, with a silver-streaked beard and a friendly face that crinkled into a smile as he greeted Samuel. After a brief conversation, Samuel gestured toward the cabin, and both men approached. Kathryn stepped away from the window, smoothing her borrowed dress, one of Samuel's shirts that she'd altered to fit her smaller frame. The door opened, and Samuel entered, followed by the stranger. "Kathryn, this is Doc Mitchell from Laramie. Doc, Miss Kathryn Adams." The older man nodded politely. "Miss Adams, Samuel mentioned you've been recuperating here. I was on my way back from the Anderson place and thought I'd stop by to see how you're faring." Kathryn glanced at Samuel, who nodded reassuringly. "I'm much improved, thank you," she said. "Mind if I take a look, just to be sure?" After a brief examination, during which Samuel waited outside to give them privacy, Doc Mitchell pronounced Kathryn well on the road to recovery. "You were lucky Samuel found you when he did," the doctor said as he packed his bag. "Exposure and dehydration can kill as surely as any bullet." "I know," Kathryn said softly. "I owe him my life." Doc Mitchell studied her for a moment. "Samuel's a good man. Best I know, in fact. Been out here alone too long, though." He paused. "Folks in town talk, of course." "Samuel's trying to protect your reputation by saying you're his cousin, come to help for the winter." Kathryn blushed. "It's not we aren't," the doctor held up a hand. "No need to explain to me. I'm just letting you know what story's being told in case you ride into town." After the doctor left, Kathryn found Samuel chopping wood behind the cabin. She watched him for a moment, admiring the fluid strength in his movements. "Thank you," she said when he paused to wipe his brow, "for protecting my reputation in town." Samuel set down the axe. "Seemed the simplest solution. People talk, and I didn't want anyone thinking ill of you. Doc Mitchell said you told them I'm your cousin. Second cousin, to be precise." A faint smile crossed his face. From back east, come to help after falling on hard times. Close enough to the truth to be believable, Kathryn nodded. It was thoughtful of you, Samuel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Laramie's a small town. Word gets around. I figured if your uncle comes looking, it might throw him off the trail. The mention of her uncle sobered Kathryn. Do you think he will? Come looking, I mean. Hard to say. Men like that usually don't like losing what they consider theirs. Samuel picked up the axe again. But we're pretty remote out here, and winter's coming on fast. Even if he does come searching, the snow will likely keep him away until spring. The thought brought both relief and a strange sadness to Kathryn. Spring seemed very far away, but it would eventually come. And then what? She would need to move on, find work somewhere her uncle wouldn't think to look. The idea of leaving the cabin, of leaving Samuel, was unexpectedly painful. Kathryn, Samuel was watching her, concern in his eyes. You all right? She forced a smile. Yes, just thinking about the future. One day at a time, he advised. That's all any of us can do. As autumn deepened toward winter, the days fell into a comfortable pattern. Samuel taught Kathryn to shoot his old Winchester repeater, insisting she needed to be able to defend herself if necessary. She proved to be a quick study, her aim improving with each practice session. My father taught me the basics when I was younger, she explained after hitting the center of a target Samuel had set up. He believed women should know how to handle firearms, especially out west. Your father was a wise man, Samuel said, impressed by her growing skill. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape into a glittering white expanse. Kathryn stood at the cabin door in wonder, watching fat flakes drift down from a pearl-gray sky. It's beautiful, she breathed. Samuel came to stand beside her. First snow always is. Less charming by February when we're sick of being cooped up. Kathryn glanced up at him. Will we be truly snowed in? For weeks at a time, most likely. The trail to town can become impassable after heavy snowfall. He studied her face. Does that worry you? No, she said, surprised to find it was true. I feel safe here. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening around his eyes. I'm glad. As winter settled in earnest, the cabin became a snug haven against the howling winds and bitter cold. They passed the long evenings with Samuel teaching Kathryn to play chess on a worn board he'd carried with him from Pennsylvania, or reading aloud from the small collection of books he owned. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories of their lives before fate had brought them together. Kathryn spoke of her happy childhood in Illinois, where her father had been a respected doctor and her mother had taught at the local school. Samuel told her of his 3 years fighting in the Union Army, though he skipped over the worst of the horrors he'd witnessed. Is that why you came west? Kathryn asked one evening as they sat before the fire. To escape the memories, Samuel stared into the flames. Partly. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach going back to my father's dry goods store. Couldn't imagine spending my life indoors, counting inventory. He glanced at her. Out here, there's space to breathe, room for the memories to spread out, become less crushing. And has it worked? Have they faded? Some, he admitted. Having purpose helps. Building something of my own, watching a calf grow to a cow, seeing crops come up where there was just wild grass before. He paused. Having company helps too. The simple admission warmed Kathryn more than the fire. I'm glad. As December arrived, bringing with it the prospect of Christmas, Kathryn found herself wanting to create some small celebration despite their isolation. While Samuel was out checking on the cattle one afternoon, she took inventory of their supplies and formulated a plan. On Christmas Eve, she shooed Samuel out of the cabin for 2 hours, insisting he find some task to occupy himself in the barn. When he returned, the cabin had been transformed. Pine boughs decorated the mantel, filling the air with their fresh scent. The table was set with their best plates, which weren't much, but she'd polished them until they gleamed. A small cake, made with precious sugar she'd been saving, sat in the center. Samuel stopped in the doorway, his expression one of stunned appreciation. "Kathryn, this is." "Merry Christmas," she said, suddenly shy. "I know it's not much, it's perfect." His voice was rough with emotion. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since before the war." They shared a special dinner of venison stew and cornbread, followed by the cake. Afterward, to Kathryn's surprise, Samuel produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I had this in my saddlebag when I found you," he explained. "Was bringing it back from town for myself, but—" He held it out to her. "Seems right that you should have it." Kathryn unwrapped the package to find a beautiful comb carved from buffalo horn, inlaid with tiny pieces of turquoise. "Samuel, I can't accept this. It's too fine, please," he said quietly. "I have nothing else to offer." The simple honesty in his words touched her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the comb. "It's beautiful." "It suits you," he said, then looked away as if embarrassed by his own words. Kathryn felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She had nothing to give him in return except— "I have something for you too," she said impulsively. "Close your eyes." When he complied, Kathryn gathered her courage and leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Samuel." His eyes flew open, surprise and something warmer reflected in their blue depths. For a moment, Kathryn thought he might say something or perhaps even return her gesture, but instead, he simply smiled. A genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Best Christmas I can remember," he said softly. As winter deepened, so too did the connection between them. It remained largely unspoken, expressed instead through small gestures, Samuel's hand at her elbow when they walked on icy ground, Kathryn's fingers lingering when she passed him a cup of coffee, the way they gravitated toward each other in the evenings, sitting closer than strictly necessary as they read or talked by the fire. January brought a blizzard that howled around the cabin for 3 days, the wind finding every crack and crevice despite Samuel's careful preparations. They huddled near the fire, taking turns feeding it through the night to keep the bitter cold at bay. On the 3rd night, as Kathryn wrapped herself in a blanket and prepared to take her watch by the fire, Samuel stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "This is foolishness," he said, his voice gruff with exhaustion. "Neither of us is getting proper rest." Kathryn's heartbeat quickened. "What do you suggest? We share the bed, for warmth and so we can both sleep." He hastened to add, "I'll be a gentleman, Kathryn. You have my word." The practical solution made sense, yet Kathryn hesitated, aware of how such an arrangement would be viewed in polite society. But they were far from polite society, alone in a blizzard where survival trumped propriety. "All right," she agreed. That night they lay back to back under a mound of quilts, a careful few inches separating them. Despite the awkwardness, Kathryn slept better than she had in days, comforted by Samuel's solid presence and the shared warmth. By morning, the space between them had vanished. Kathryn woke to find herself curled against Samuel's chest, his arm draped protectively around her. For a moment she remained still, savoring the unfamiliar but welcome feeling of being held. Then, aware that Samuel was also awake, she pulled away slightly to look up at him. "I'm sorry," she began, but he shook his head. "Don't be." His voice was rough with sleep. "Best night's rest I've had in years." The honesty in his eyes emboldened her. "For me as well." They remained like that for a long moment, studying each other in the pale winter light filtering through the window. Something was changing between them, had been changing for weeks, and in that moment, Kathryn acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling in love with Samuel Reid. The realization should have frightened her. She had sworn off dependency on any man after her experience with her uncle. Yet what she felt for Samuel wasn't dependency, it was partnership, mutual respect, and a deepening affection that warmed her from within. Before she could find words to express any of this, Samuel gently disentangled himself and rose from the bed. "Storm's past," he said, looking out the window. "I should check on the livestock." The moment broken, Kathryn nodded and began her own morning routine. But something had shifted, a boundary crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, and each night that followed, they shared the bed without discussion, gradually becoming more comfortable with the arrangement. They were careful not to cross the final line that propriety demanded remain intact, but the growing intimacy between them was undeniable. Kathryn found herself wondering what would happen when spring came. Would she still leave, as they had originally agreed? Or was there a possibility of something more permanent? February brought a brief thaw, enough that Samuel was able to make the journey into Laramie for supplies. Kathryn spent the day he was gone in nervous anticipation, worrying about his safe return and also fretting over her appearance. She washed her hair and arranged it with the buffalo horn comb, and mended her dress as best she could, wanting to look her best when he returned. When Hoofbeats finally announced his arrival late in the afternoon, Kathryn had to restrain herself from running outside to greet him. Instead, she waited by the door, her heart pounding with an emotion she now recognized clearly as love. Samuel entered the cabin with an armful of packages, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said, setting down his burden. "Was the journey difficult?" She asked, helping him unpack the supplies. "Road's still bad in places, but Maverick knows his way." He pulled something from one of the packages. "Got you something." It was a length of blue calico fabric, simple but pretty. "I thought you might like a new dress," Samuel explained, suddenly looking unsure. "Your old one's nearly worn through at the elbows." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Kathryn ran her fingers over the fabric. "It's lovely, thank you. There's thread and such too," he added. "And—" He hesitated, then produced a small paper bag. "Peppermint drops. You mentioned once they were your favorite." The simple gifts, chosen with such care, brought tears to Kathryn's eyes. This man who had so little himself had thought of her comfort and even remembered a casual comment about her favorite sweet. "Samuel," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "You're too good to me." He shook his head. "Not possible." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to thicken. Samuel raised a hand to gently touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. "Kathryn," he began, his voice husky, "I know we agreed this arrangement was temporary, that you'd move on come spring, but I find myself hoping." He trailed off, searching her face. "Hoping what?" she whispered, though she thought hoped she knew. "That you might consider staying, not as my housekeeper or guest, but as—" He took a deep breath. "As my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Kathryn's heart soared even as her mind cautioned her. Marriage was a serious step, one that would bind her to this man and this place permanently. "I don't have much to offer," Samuel continued when she didn't immediately respond. "The cabin's small, the work is hard, and I'm not always the easiest man to live with, but I promise to be a good husband. To treat you with respect and kindness, and to protect you with my life if need be." Kathryn placed her hand over his where it still rested on her cheek. "You've already shown me all those things, Samuel, every day since you found me on that trail." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "I would be honored to be your wife." The smile that broke across Samuel's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her gently into his arms, embracing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after the war," he murmured against her hair. "Never thought I deserved it, but you, Kathryn, you make me believe in second chances." She lifted her face to his. "For both of us." When their lips met for the first time, it was with the sweetness of new beginnings and the promise of a shared future. Kathryn knew there would be challenges ahead. Her uncle might still come searching. The hardships of frontier life wouldn't magically disappear, and they were still learning each other's ways. But in Samuel's arms, those concerns seemed manageable. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Laramie. The ceremony was simple, held in the town's small church with Doc Mitchell and the general store owner as witnesses. Kathryn wore a dress she'd sewn from the blue calico, her hair arranged with the buffalo horn comb, while Samuel sported a clean shirt and the only tie he owned. As they exchanged vows, Kathryn marveled at the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Her desperate flight from her uncle's cruelty had led her not to the lonely independence she'd expected, but to a partnership built on mutual respect and deepening love. Their wedding night was a revelation, tender, passionate, and marked by Samuel's gentle consideration as they navigated this new intimacy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in what was now truly their bed, Kathryn felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied honestly. "If I hadn't fled my uncle that night, if you hadn't found me on that trail." "Providence," Samuel said softly. "My mother would have called it God's hand." "What do you call it?" He considered for a moment. "The luckiest day of my life." Kathryn smiled and nestled closer to him. "Mine too." As March arrived, bringing the first hints of spring, they settled into life as husband and wife. The work remained hard. There were cattle to tend, a vegetable garden to prepare, and endless chores to maintain their small homestead. But they faced it together, finding joy in shared labor and quiet evenings. Kathryn discovered she had a knack for gardening, expanding the small plot behind the cabin to include herbs and flowers alongside the practical vegetables. Samuel built her a proper clothesline and shelves for her growing collection of preserves. Together, they made plans to add a room to the cabin, dreaming of a future that might include children. They were discussing these plans one mild spring afternoon when the sound of approaching riders interrupted their conversation. Samuel immediately tensed, reaching for the rifle that was never far from hand. "Stay inside," he told Kathryn, his expression grim as he moved to the window. She ignored the instruction, joining him to peer out at the 3 men approaching on horseback. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the man in the lead. "It's my uncle," she whispered, fear constricting her throat. "And that's Harlan Weber with him." Samuel's jaw tightened. "How did they find us?" "Someone in town must have talked." Kathryn's hands trembled. "Samuel, Weber is dangerous. He's killed men before." "So have I," Samuel replied quietly, "during the war. But I'm not eager to do so again." He handed her the rifle. "Take this and go to the back room. If anything happens to me, there's a loose floorboard under the bed with emergency money. Take Maverick and ride for the Mitchell place." "I'm not leaving you," Kathryn said firmly, setting the rifle aside. "He's my uncle. Let me try to talk to him first." Samuel looked ready to argue, but the riders were already dismounting in the yard. "Stay behind me," he conceded. They stepped onto the porch together, Samuel's tall frame partially shielding Kathryn from view. Her uncle, Hiram Adams, was a stocky man with a perpetual scowl that had only deepened upon seeing her. Beside him, Harlan Weber sat astride a sleek black horse, his expensive clothing and silver-tipped cane marking him as a man of wealth. The third man was clearly a hired gun, his hand resting casually near his holster. "There you are, you ungrateful girl," Hiram called out. "Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused? Running off like a thief in the night, letting us think you dead or worse." "I left a note," Kathryn replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I made it clear I wouldn't marry Mr. Weber." Weber laughed, a cold sound that sent shivers down Kathryn's spine. "And yet here you are, living in sin with some saddle tramp. Your virtue couldn't have been worth much concern." Samuel's shoulders stiffened, but his voice remained controlled. "You're addressing my wife, Mr. Weber." "I'd appreciate a civil tongue." "Wife," Hiram spat. "No Adams woman marries without family consent. Whatever backwoods ceremony you performed isn't worth the paper it's written on." "We were legally married in Laramie last month," Kathryn said, "with proper witnesses and documentation." "I'm no longer your concern, Uncle." Weber dismounted, leaning on his cane as he approached the porch. "This is all very touching, but it changes nothing. Your uncle promised you to me, and I always collect what I'm owed." "A woman isn't property to be promised or collected," Samuel said, his hand moving closer to the pistol at his hip. "My wife has made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it and leave our land." The hired gun also dismounted, spreading out to the side in a flanking position. The tension in the air was palpable, violence hovering just beneath the surface. "Your land," Weber laughed again. "Do you know who I am, Cowboy? I own half the territory north of here. Men like you work for men like me." "Not this man," Samuel replied evenly. "This is my ranch, small as it is, and you're trespassing." Weber's amusement vanished, replaced by cold anger. "Adams, get your niece. We're leaving." Hiram moved toward the porch, but Samuel stepped forward to block his path. "The lady stays." Weber nodded almost imperceptibly to his gunman, who drew his weapon with practiced speed. Before he could aim, however, Kathryn raised the rifle she'd retrieved from inside. "I wouldn't," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she sighted down the barrel at the gunman. "I'm a better shot than I look." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Weber laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Well, well, the little dove has talons after all." "I never wanted trouble," Kathryn said. "I just wanted to live my own life, make my own choices. Why can't you respect that?" "Because women don't know what's good for them," her uncle snapped. "Your father spoiled you with all that education and independence. Look where it's led, living in a hovel with a nobody." "I'd rather live in a hovel with a good man than in a mansion with a monster," Kathryn replied, her eyes flicking to Weber. The cattle baron's face darkened. "You'll regret those words, girl." "This has gone far enough," Samuel said. "Miss Adams, Mrs. Reed, has made her choice. The law recognizes our marriage, even if you don't. If you try to take her by force, I'll consider it kidnapping and act accordingly." Weber studied Samuel for a long moment, seeming to take his measure. Whatever he saw must have given him pause, for he finally stepped back. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "No one refuses Harlan Weber. No one." "I just did," Kathryn said, "and now I'm asking you to leave our property." With a curt nod to his companions, Weber returned to his horse. "Adams, come. We're wasting time here." Hiram hesitated, looking at Kathryn with a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said finally. "No," Kathryn replied, lowering the rifle slightly. "My mother taught me to stand up for myself. She would be proud." Without another word, her uncle mounted his horse and the three men rode away. Kathryn and Samuel remained on the porch until they disappeared from sight, the tension slowly draining from their bodies. "They'll be back," Samuel said quietly. "Men like Weber don't give up easily." Kathryn nodded, leaning against him as reaction set in, making her legs weak. "What will we do?" Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "We'll be ready. And in the meantime, we'll live our lives. I won't let them drive us away from what we're building here." That night, as they lay in bed discussing their options, Samuel suggested they might consider moving further west, perhaps to Oregon or California, where Weber's influence wouldn't reach. "We could start fresh," he said. "Somewhere no one knows us." Kathryn considered the idea. "Is that what you want, to leave here?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "This land means a lot to me. It's the first thing I've truly owned, built with my own hands. But you mean more." He turned to face her in the darkness. "I'd give it up in a heartbeat to keep you safe." The simple declaration brought tears to Kathryn's eyes. No one had ever put her welfare above their own interests before. "Let's not decide tonight," she said. "Weber made threats, but he might not act on them. He has a reputation to consider." "True," Samuel agreed, "and we have friends in town. Doc Mitchell, Reverend Hayes, they'd stand with us if it came to it." They drifted to sleep holding each other close, the future uncertain but their commitment to each other absolute. The next few weeks passed without incident, though they remained vigilant. Samuel taught Kathryn to recognize the signs of approaching riders and established signals they could use if they needed to warn each other of danger. They also rode into Laramie to speak with the sheriff, explaining the situation and filing a formal complaint against Weber for his threats. "Not much I can do unless he actually breaks the law," Sheriff Cooper told them, "but I'll keep an eye out. Weber has influence, but he's not above the law." As April bloomed into May, they began to hope that perhaps Weber had decided they weren't worth the trouble. Life settled back into its rhythm of work and simple pleasures. The garden flourished under Kathryn's care, and Samuel's small herd grew with the addition of several healthy calves. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Kathryn took Samuel's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "I'm with child," she said softly, watching his face for his reaction. Samuel's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby? You're sure?" Kathryn nodded. "Doc Mitchell confirmed it when we were in town yesterday. He thinks the baby will come around Christmas." "A Christmas baby," Samuel whispered, his hand still resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Kathryn, that's wonderful news." The pure happiness in his face eased any lingering doubt she'd had about his reaction. They had never explicitly discussed children, though the addition to the cabin suggested Samuel had considered the possibility. "Are you truly happy about this?" she asked. "Our lives are still unsettled with Weber's threats hanging over us." Samuel gathered her into his arms. "I've never been happier about anything in my life. And as for Weber, this just gives me one more reason to make sure he never harms you." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll figure it out, Kathryn, together." The news of the baby changed something in Samuel. He became more determined than ever to secure their future, working from dawn until dusk to improve the ranch and build up their savings. The room addition to the cabin was completed within weeks, and he began making plans to hire a hand to help with the heavier work, so Kathryn wouldn't need to strain herself as her pregnancy progressed. June brought the first visible changes to Kathryn's figure, a gentle rounding that only Samuel would notice. They kept the news of the baby quiet for now, not wanting word to reach Weber that might renew his interest in causing trouble. Their caution proved wise. In early July, Doc Mitchell rode out to the ranch with disturbing news. "Weber's been asking questions in town," he told them over coffee at their kitchen table. "About your marriage, about Samuel's claim to this land. I don't like it." Samuel's expression hardened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's looking for legal angles to cause trouble. He's been seen with Judge Hollister from the territorial court, and that man's known to be susceptible to financial persuasion." Kathryn placed a protective hand over her now visible pregnancy. "What can we do?" Doc Mitchell sighed. "Make sure all your paperwork is in order, your marriage certificate, the deed to this land, everything. And consider what your limits are. Weber's the type to start with legal harassment and escalate if that doesn't work." After the doctor left, Samuel and Kathryn sat in troubled silence. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Maybe we should consider leaving after all, at least until the baby comes. We could go to California, make a fresh start." Kathryn studied her husband's face, seeing the conflict there. This land meant everything to him. It represented his independence. His success after the war had nearly broken him. Asking him to abandon it felt wrong. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let Weber drive us from our home. This is where our child should be born, on the land his father built. His." Samuel raised an eyebrow, a brief smile breaking through his worry. "Or her," Kathryn amended with an answering smile. "Either way, this is our home. We'll fight for it." True to Doc Mitchell's warning, the legal harassment began the following week. A deputy rode out with papers claiming discrepancies in Samuel's original land claim. Then came questions about the validity of their marriage, since Kathryn had been promised to another. Each challenge required trips to Laramie to sort out, taking Samuel away from crucial work on the ranch and draining their limited resources. Through it all, Kathryn's pregnancy progressed, her body changing as the new life within her grew. Despite the stress of Weber's campaign against them, these months held a special sweetness as she and Samuel prepared for their child. They discussed names, rearranged the cabin to make room for a cradle, and spent quiet evenings with Samuel's hand resting on her rounded belly, feeling the baby's movements. By October, Weber's legal maneuvers had mostly failed, thanks in part to the surprising support they received from the community. Townspeople who had previously kept a polite distance now stepped forward with testimonials about Samuel's character and the legitimacy of his claim. Even Sheriff Cooper, usually careful not to take sides in disputes involving powerful men, made it clear he considered the Reeds' marriage and property rights entirely valid. "Weber's made himself unpopular," Doc Mitchell explained during a checkup visit. "People are tired of his bullying." And he added with a wink at Kathryn, "They're quite taken with the story of the handsome cowboy who rescued the damsel in distress. Makes for good frontier romance." Kathryn blushed, but Samuel just laughed. "If being seen as characters in a dime novel helps us keep our land, I won't complain." As winter approached again, bringing with it the anniversary of Kathryn's arrival at the cabin, they dared to hope the worst was behind them. Weber hadn't been seen in Laramie for weeks, and rumors suggested he'd turned his attention to a railway dispute further north. Kathryn, now in her final months of pregnancy, settled into preparations for both the baby and winter. She preserved the last of the garden's bounty, worked on tiny clothes for the child, and transformed their humble cabin into a warm, welcoming home that bore little resemblance to the bachelor quarters it had once been. Samuel had hired a young man named Ben as a ranch hand, allowing him to focus more on preparations for the coming cold months and less on the daily demands of the cattle. Together, they reinforced the barn, stocked firewood, and ensured they had supplies to last through even the harshest weather. One crisp November evening, as the first snowflakes of the season drifted down, Kathryn sat in the rocking chair Samuel had made for her, her hands resting on her prominent belly. Samuel entered from checking on the livestock, bringing a gust of cold air with him. "Storm's coming," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "A big one from the feel of it," Kathryn nodded. "I've been watching the clouds all day. We should be prepared for a blizzard." Samuel crossed to her, kneeling beside the rocker to place a gentle hand on her stomach. As if in response, the baby kicked forcefully, making them both smile. "Strong little thing," Samuel said proudly. "Takes after his mother." "Or her father," Kathryn countered, covering his hand with her own. "Either way, I think we're in for a lively child." Samuel's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking, if the weather turns bad, we might be cut off from town when your time comes. Doc Mitchell said he'd try to be here, but—" "I know," Kathryn said softly. "I've thought of that too, but women have been having babies without doctors present since the beginning of time. If necessary, Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch said she would come help. She's delivered many babies." Samuel looked unconvinced but nodded. "I just want everything to be perfect for you and the baby." "It will be," Kathryn assured him, "because we'll be together." The predicted storm arrived with a vengeance 2 days later, bringing howling winds and snow that quickly obscured the landscape. By evening, visibility was reduced to nothing beyond the windows, and the temperature plummeted. Samuel stoked the fire high and moved Kathryn's rocking chair closer to its warmth. "How are you feeling?" he asked, noticing the way she rubbed her lower back. "Just the usual discomfort," she assured him. "The baby's getting heavy." As the night wore on, however, Kathryn's discomfort increased. What had started as a dull ache in her back spread to her abdomen, coming in waves that gradually grew more intense. By midnight, there was no denying what was happening. "Samuel," she said during a lull between pains, "I think the baby's coming." His face paled. "Now." "But it's too early," Doc Mitchell said. "Christmas. Babies come when they're ready, not according to schedules," Kathryn said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction gripped her. Samuel moved into action with the same steady competence he showed in all crises. He stoked the fire even higher, put water on to boil, and gathered clean linens. The birthing supplies they'd prepared were arranged near the bed, which he'd already positioned for maximum comfort and accessibility. "I'll go for Mrs. Peterson," he said, reaching for his coat. Kathryn caught his arm. "Samuel, you can't. The storm, you'd never find your way, and I need you here." He looked torn, clearly terrified of handling the birth alone, but equally afraid of leaving her. Another strong contraction made the decision for them as Kathryn gripped his hand with surprising strength. "We can do this," she gasped when the pain subsided. "Together." The next hours were a blur of pain, fear, and determination. Kathryn drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, while Samuel provided steady support, following the instructions Doc Mitchell had given them just in case. As dawn approached, though the storm still raged outside, Kathryn's labor intensified. "It's close," she panted. "I can feel it." Samuel positioned himself to assist with the delivery, his hands remarkably steady despite his fear. "You can do this, Kathryn. You're the strongest person I know." With a final, tremendous effort, Kathryn pushed their child into the world. The baby's lusty cry filled the cabin, bringing tears to both parents' eyes. "A girl," Samuel announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the squirming infant in a clean cloth. "We have a daughter, Kathryn." He placed the baby on Kathryn's chest, where she immediately calmed, blinking up at her mother with unfocused eyes. Kathryn traced a gentle finger over the perfect tiny features, marveling at the miracle they had created. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Samuel sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Kathryn's shoulders as they both gazed at their daughter. Outside, the storm continued, but within the cabin, a profound peace had settled. "What shall we call her?" Samuel asked. Kathryn studied the baby's face. "Sarah," she decided. "After your mother." "Sarah Elizabeth Reid." "It's perfect," Samuel agreed, pressing a kiss to Kathryn's temple. "She's perfect, and so are you." The storm raged for 2 more days, effectively cutting them off from the outside world, but it hardly mattered. Their world had narrowed to the confines of the cabin, centered on the tiny, miraculous being who had joined their family. Samuel proved to be a natural father, holding Sarah with careful hands that belied their strength, changing her wrappings without complaint, and walking the floor with her when she fussed during the night to let Kathryn rest. When the storm finally broke, leaving a transformed white landscape in its wake, Doc Mitchell managed to make his way to the cabin on snowshoes. He pronounced both mother and baby in excellent health and congratulated Samuel on his successful delivery. "Not many men would have kept their heads so well," the doctor observed. "You've got a fine family here, Samuel." Samuel's chest swelled with pride. "The finest," he agreed, watching as Kathryn nursed their daughter by the fire. The next months passed in a haze of new parent exhaustion and joy. Sarah grew quickly, her personality emerging as a blend of her father's quiet strength and her mother's determination. Winter gradually gave way to spring, bringing with it renewed life and activity on the ranch. Of Weber, they heard little. The railway dispute had apparently consumed his attention, and the community's support for the Reeds had made further legal challenges difficult. Still, they remained cautious, aware that such a man rarely admitted defeat permanently. In April, as the first wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, Samuel and Kathryn celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a small gathering at their ranch. Doc Mitchell came, along with Reverend Hayes, Sheriff Cooper, and several neighbors who had become friends over the months of shared hardship and support. As they sat around a table laden with Kathryn's cooking, Sarah sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby, Sheriff Cooper raised his glass in a toast. "To the Reeds," he said, "who remind us that even in this wild country, love and decency can take root and flourish." Later, as they stood on the porch watching their guests depart, Kathryn leaned against Samuel's solid frame. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "A year ago, when you found me on that trail," Samuel shook his head. "Never in my wildest dreams. I was just trying to help someone in need." "I had no idea I was saving my own future happiness." Kathryn smiled up at him. "My hero Cowboy." "Hardly a hero," he demurred. "Just a man lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time." "You're my hero," she insisted. "You saved me from more than just death on that trail. You showed me what real love looks like." Samuel cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "And you showed me that life could be more than just survival, that even after everything I'd seen and done in the war, I could still find joy and peace." Their kiss was interrupted by Sarah's cry from inside the cabin. They both laughed, the sound mingling with the evening birdsong. "Duty calls," Samuel said. Hand in hand, they returned to the cabin that had become a true home. As Kathryn lifted their daughter from her cradle, soothing her with gentle words, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. Her desperate flight from cruelty had led her not to isolation or hardship, but to love, family, and a sense of belonging she had feared lost forever. And Samuel, the quiet cowboy who had once thought himself too damaged by war for happiness, had found healing in the family they created together. Outside, the western sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Another day was ending on their small piece of Wyoming territory, a day filled with the ordinary miracles of love and life that neither of them took for granted. "I love you," Samuel said simply, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. "And I love you," Kathryn replied. "Both of you, always." In the soft light of their cabin, surrounded by the life they had built together, they were home,